In this video, I'm going to be showing you everything you need to know for you and your team to properly take out Amascut. I'm going to be showing the point of view of every single role, so the base, the necromancer, and the mages, as well as showing what everyone should be doing phase by phase. So we'll start with phase 1 as the base, and then we'll move on to phase 1 as a DPSer, and so on and so forth through the entire 7 phases of the boss fight. So hopefully in this video, you and your team can learn everything you need to know to take on Amascut. If I show you how to do it at 2000%, it's just going to be easier at the lower Enrages, and you can start down there and work your way up. I also want to mention before we get into this video that I have done the vast majority of my 2000% Enrage kills as the base, and I'm a much more experienced base than the other roles, but the other roles are also a little bit more simple. So hopefully in this video, you should be able to pick up everything you need. But my strategies for basing are super refined, whereas my strategies for DPSing, both as a mage and as a necromancer, they're still pretty good, but they're not nearly as experienced. And I did want to get right out front and say that. I've based about 62,000% Enrage Amascut kills, and it's by far my favorite role in the boss fight, and then my remaining 10 or 15 kills have all been done using either magic or necromancy. But with that said, we've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. When you're basing at Amascut, unlike a lot of other bosses where there's a ton of desire to pump out as much damage as possible, the DPSers have a DPS role, they don't have a lot of damage taken, and they don't have too many mechanics to deal with. So as a base, your primary objective really is to stay alive. So while when you're a little more advanced, you can bring a different combat style or bring some power gear as well, your primary goal here is just to stay alive. And if you can stay alive, that is your job extremely well done. So with that said, in my preset, I'm going to be wearing 5-piece Crypt Bloom, I'm going to be wearing an Essence of Finality with a Gothic staff in it, and then on top of that, I'm also using a Channeler's Ring instead of a Reaver's Ring because hit chance can be a little bit hard to come by. In my invent, I've got an Overload, I've got an Arcane Spirit Shield to give me 30% less damage taken when I have it equipped. I've just got a whole bunch of food and Super Saradomin Brews. The one other thing that I bring when I'm basing is I bring a Statius Warhammer Essence of Finality, as well as a Langsword so that I can actually use the Statius Warhammer, and depending on the team, someone else may like to hammer the boss, but especially on the first 3 phases, it's extremely good to get that hammer off, as a lot of the ways that you're going to improve your hit chance are going to progressively get stronger throughout the fight. So think about things like Blackstone Arrows and the Lord of Bones incantation that take a little bit before they're charged up enough to make a big difference. Outside of that, I've got some standard magic gear, and in terms of auras, I really like the Penance aura, because when you're wearing that Spirit Shield, if you don't have the Penance aura on, you end up getting smited all of the time, as the damage you get reduced comes out of your prayer points. With that said, if you don't have a Spirit Shield, you could use the Aegis aura, and if you want a little bit more damage, Majorat works well. This is the kind of setup that I would use if I was DPSing as a mage, or when I was DPSing as a mage at 2000% Enrage, and you're gonna notice a couple things that are a little different in the setup. First off, I've got a Ring of Death in my preset. This can be really nice for phase 7, very optional, but can be good to bring. And then other than that, you're also gonna see a set of Crypt Bloom in my invent, and this is specifically for different parts of phases 2 and 4, where the boss fight gets just a little bit crazy, and there's kind of a lot of pandemonium going on, and it's just mostly to make sure that I don't die and let my teammates down on the parts that I'm a little less comfortable with. Outside of that though, you're gonna see that I'm wearing 5-piece magic DPS gear. It doesn't really matter what this is. It could be Apmeken's Resplendence gear, it could be Elite Tectonic, kind of doesn't really matter. Bring whatever you'd like for DPS gear, and you're gonna notice here as a DPSer, I'm actually not gonna take very much damage at all throughout the fight, so it's actually really chill outside of the base. So as the DPSers, you should have a lot of free time to output a lot of damage, and then the base just gets absolutely blasted. And now I'm gonna show you what the Necromancer would bring, and in most groups, you'd either bring 1 or 2 Necromancers. There are pros and cons to either one, but a couple Necromancers or 1 Necromancer definitely works. If you wanted to bring more than this in terms of Necromancers, you definitely could. I haven't seen any groups go with like a mage base and 4 Necromancers, but you'd definitely be able to do it. I'm just wearing 5-piece Raziel gear, so just full power Necromancy gear. I'm using a Jas book just because while you're learning, you don't want to take a ton of extra damage, and the full book can be a bit dangerous. I'm running the Equilibrium aura, and then outside of that, it's just an invent full of lots of food. You don't need to bring like a Devourer guard or any of that stuff. I was also just testing out all of the new gear at the same time. With that said, why don't we get started with the base point of view? I'm going to run through phase 1, and we can talk about what I'm doing and what my teammates are doing at the same time. So let's get into that. The first thing you're gonna notice as the base is that I'm on a different side of the room from everybody else. It doesn't really matter how you set this up. You could do this on the east side or on the west side, just as long as your group knows that you are on the opposite side. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It's that some of the auto attacks you take are actually gonna splinter off and then hit members of your group as range damage, and they're actually pretty high hitting, especially at 2000% Enrage, but if you stand away from everybody else, they will not get any attacks. So they're only going to be hit by the mage attack. The melee attack is not going to splinter off. So that's why the base kind of gets to stay in their own little world. And the boss fight is going to start. You're also going to see at 2000 Enrage that the boss fight has 12 million life points, but with 5 people, that is not so bad. You're also going to notice I'm going to start this fight off with a Sunshine, and by trying to do some damage, it's not a bad thing to do, obviously, once you're more comfortable, but once again, the priority is staying alive and dealing with the mechanics. And we'll go through all of that in a little bit. But everyone in the DPS pile is going to group up, and then the base is going to be kind of in their own little world, just kind of dealing damage and dealing with the mechanics. So let's get into that and take a look at what that looks like. You're also going to see a bar above the boss's head. I'll zoom in on it. Whenever this bar fills up, that means that Amascut is going to do a mechanic. This first mechanic that the boss is going to do is called triple tap. And the boss is going to shoot out 3 different colors of beams, and one is going to be range, one is going to be melee, and one is going to be magic. And all you have to do is prayer flick them. But if you miss a prayer flick, you're also going to get stunned in place. So it's really easy to miss a prayer flick and then get hit by all of them because you're stunned in place and your keybinds don't work when you're stunned. So when you're learning, I'd also probably recommend using Anticipate or Freedom before this attack or as it's coming out, just to make it a little bit easier. But to deal with it, it is as easy as doing this. I see red first, so I'm going to put on melee prey. The second one I see there is green, which means that's going to be a ranged hit. So after I see that I've taken some melee damage, I'm going to put on the range prayer. And then the third one you're going to see there is blue for magic. So it's melee prey. I'm going to swap to range, take a range hit, swap to magic, and that is a magic hit. And if you tank this to the face, it's going to hit you like a 4 or a 5k for each hit. And once again, when you're learning this, if you wanted to just use Freedom or Anticipate and then also run a defensive, you are more than welcome to do that, but that is the correct way to do it. It's the triple tap, and it's not always going to come out in the same order, so you have to pay attention to what comes out. As the base moving forward through the kill, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the prayer flicking, because it has caught a lot of people out, and kind of rightfully so. Something that Amascut is going to do is after a number of attacks with the same combat style, you're going to see that Amascut is going to start by hitting you twice back to back with the same style. And as soon as Amascut hits twice with the same style, what that means is that Amascut is about to switch. So because I just took 2 melee hits here, what you're gonna notice is the very next attack is gonna be 1 melee hit and 1 magic hit. And what that's gonna mean is that then after that point, Amascut is gonna be maging for a little bit, and it'll just go back and forth between those two. So whenever you see 2 magic hits, that means after those 2 magic hits, it's gonna go magic, melee, and then start hitting you with melee. So that's a really good opportunity to use Resonance or Disruption Shield, possibly anything like Debilitate or Reflect if you want to, or just make sure you've got a couple thousand life points. Okay, so the first mechanic in the boss fight, as we've just shown, is the triple tap, and the second mechanic in the boss fight, you're gonna see the boss is gonna spawn a number of scarabs around the arena. And at this point in the fight, all of the DPSers are just hitting the boss, and you're gonna see that they're actually gonna deal with the scarab mechanic. As soon as we get to the end of phase 1, I'll show you the DPS perspective on this, but it's pretty simple. As these scarabs spawn, your dive is gonna be reset over and over again, so if you look at what Cash is doing over there, he's just diving around onto all of the scarab mounds, and because of that, not very many are gonna spawn. When these scarabs do spawn though, you do want to stun them. Necromancy is really good for this because you can use Threads of Fate and the Death Guard special to hit a whole bunch of them, but you want to get rid of these scarabs. Everyone that blows up on you is going to hit you about 2000 damage. But you're going to see that as the base, after the scarab spawn, that is my sign to build to immortality and use Immort. And the reason for that is the third mechanic of the fight is called Bend the Knee. The way that this attack works is it's going to be about 20,000 damage directed to the base, and the intent for this mechanic is that everyone in the group has to come together under the base because the damage you take is divided by the number of players on the same tile. But as everyone is currently dealing with scarabs, instead of dealing with any of that, I'm just going to use the immortality ability, and you're going to see here that it's going to go up, and then it is going to proc my immortality, and I am still alive and good to go. It's also worth noting here, this attack does hit through barricade, and it has penetration through a lot of defensive, so it's basically immortality here or nothing, especially at 1000 or 2000% Enrage. At 500 though, if you want to stack like Reflect, Resonance, Disruption Shield, and you use a Vitality Potion, you can also just tank it, but I would still recommend using Immort if you're basing it. Okay, we're almost out of the mechanics of phase 1, by the way, and a lot of these mechanics repeat throughout the fight, so we're making really good progress here, as phase 1 does not end based on how much damage you deal, but it actually ends at 1 minute and 20 seconds no matter what. So So with that said, we're just going to continue dealing with the mechanics. Right there, I just got 2 magic hits, and what that means is that I want to swap to deflect melee because I'm going to get a melee hit right after. The next mechanic you're going to have actually affects the whole group, and this is basically the first time anyone else in the group should be taking any significant damage or really having to deal with the mechanics. You can kind of see how the base has to deal with a lot more than everybody else, where they could really cleanly focus on damage. And for this mechanic, your skybox is going to change color, and that is going to signify that everyone on the team is going to take 3 hits of whatever color the boss changed to. There's also a voice line that changes depending on which combat style is used, but for all strength withers and my screen going red, what that means is that we're all going to want to pray melee and use something like devotion or reflect with a resonance. It's basically the exact same thing as the cannon from the Archglacior, if you're familiar, or the onslaught attack from Nicatra. So either way, we're gonna grab our 3 melee hits just like that. I'm gonna use devotion so that I don't take any damage. And you're gonna see one absolute juicer in my group deciding to use reflect and reprisal and doing it that way. It's totally up to you what you wanna do, but it's gonna be 3 hits of the same combat style. Okay, I chose to res the 3rd one, and now we are continuing to attack the boss. And congratulations, we've now made it through just about all of the base mechanics as the boss now begins to repeat. So at 104, we're gonna get a grovel, which is the triple tap once again. It starts with magic, then we've got a melee hit, so I'm gonna swap to melee. Then we've got a range attack, so I'm gonna swap to range. You're also gonna notice here that I did use anticipate because I wanna make sure that if I miss any of these, I am not going straight to Death's Office. Also going to notice that I am using some defensive abilities here. In this instance, I used Barricade, and the boss will hit you through Barricade a little bit, but you're welcome to do this as the base, especially when you're learning. The boss is about to phase here, so it kind of doesn't matter all that much how much damage I'm doing here. Although I could have done something like a wand spec, it's all good. The damage is really less important as the base. But with that said, why don't we go take a look at phase 1 as a DPSer. Okay, so as a DPSer, we're gonna head on down into the boss fight, and you're gonna see it is a lot more simple. I'm not gonna have to pause this nearly as much. We're all just standing in a pile and dealing damage. You have to flick the magic hits or deal with the magic hits, but outside of those magic hits, basically everything else, you can just go ham and do as much damage as you'd like. That was the first mechanic that the base dealt with. Now, we are about to head into Scarabs. I also wanted to mention here that certain teams will decide to all use Barricade on the Scarabs. I personally don't like this strategy because every single person has to use Barricade because you cannot use Intercept at 2000 Enrage. It's just completely disabled. But if you wanted to, or you're really struggling with Scarabs, everyone could build up to Barricade. And it's one of those things where because damage doesn't really matter all that much at this boss compared to a lot of others, you can get away with everybody using Barricade and it's not like entirely trolling. In this group, we've decided to deal with Scarabs. And in terms of roles here, different people in the group will be assigned to cover different areas. So you're gonna see here, the player up top here over my cursor was designated to cover the east, so they're going to immediately head over to the east side and work on that, while everybody else is going to move around in the other areas. I was told in this instance that I did not need to deal with any of the far ones, so instead I'm just going to go close and do a bit of a greater chain combo, but you're going to see all of the Scarabs get taken care of. Once again, it's 2k per Scarab, so you don't want to leave too many alive, and once all of the Scarabs are dealt with, you're just going to get back onto the boss and continue attacking. And as you can see here, I'm just camping Soul Split right now, but my screen has now gone green. Because my screen has gone green, I am now going to pray deflect range, and I'm also going to do a reflect resonance combo just to get a little bit of extra damage on the boss, but you'll see most players in the group are just going to use devotion and not really worry about it. This is such a cool mechanic, by the way, a bit of an aside, but I just love that your entire screen changes color. It just looks really, really sick. We are now going to continue dealing damage, and that is the extent of the phase 1 mechanics of Amascut, which is kind of nice if we're being entirely honest. I really like how mechanically unchallenging it is for the DPSers, where they really have a good opportunity just to deal their damage while the base handles the rest. But with that said, we are about to head into phase 2, so why don't we go take a look at that now. At the start of phase 2 as a base, what I like to do is I like to help out one of the 2 sides. You're gonna have 2 DPSers going towards each portal, and then I'm gonna support one of those 2 groups. You could either go to support whichever group has the lower amount of DPS or the most people learning the boss, or alternatively, you can actually stack one side to get it done faster, and that's another really viable strat, which we'll talk about why in a little bit. But for now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head on over, and the first thing I'm gonna do at the start of phase 2 is I'm gonna cast the Entangle spell both on the Gatekeeper Gorilla and on the Crocodile. The Gatekeeper Gorilla does an absolute ton of damage and he can stun, so it's really important to lock him in place so he can't move. And then for the Crocodile, it's nice to keep it rooted in place because sometimes the Crocodiles don't do the absolute best job of dying, and if that's the case, you don't want them running after either yourself or anyone who comes out of a portal, so Entangle is really nice there. You can kill the Gorilla with whatever you want, but the Crocodile has a very interesting mechanic, which is that you can only deal damage to it with basic abilities. What this means is if you use something like an Omni Power or a Threshold ability or a special attack, instead of dealing damage to the Crocodile is going to reflect all of that damage right back on you, so the Crocs can be pretty difficult to kill. Necromancy is really good to use on the Crocodiles because Conjurers do an absolute ton of damage. The Necromancy basic attack also does a lot of damage, and you can use things like Deathmark, but if you're dealing with them with magic, it's just a whole lot of bleeds, and then the one other thing you can do if you want to is you can use an Ice auto attack with the Rack or Rack and Ruin abilities to get a good amount of damage on the Crocs. The Crocodiles will always lock on to whichever player is closest to them when they spawn in, and they can't be provoked, so even if I'm the base, I can't actually go around the room and grab all the Crocodiles. So if I want the Crocodile on me, I need to make sure that I'm at the spawn point and I'm the closest. The Crocodiles attack predominantly with ranged, but they also do have an adrenaline bar, which I'll show on screen, and when that bar fills up, they'll deal one singular magic hit to your character, and that's also going to reduce your adrenaline gain. So basically, these Crocodiles are extremely annoying, and if they're within range of attacking you, you want to get rid of them quick. The first mechanic of the second phase, though, is Apmeken's Burden, which is a bleed that is going to go on one player, and I'll show you on screen exactly what that looks like as it's about to spawn in. Apmeken's Burden is basically a virus. It's very similar to the blue mechanic at Yakamaru if you're familiar, but basically how this works is it's going to consistently hit you a couple thousand damage over and over and over again, and the amount of times it hits depends on your Enrage. But if it hits any singular player 8 times or more, that becomes a hard type instant kill, so you actually have to pass it on to your teammates, because as soon as you've had the virus, you can't actually receive it again later on in the fight. So what you want to do is whichever player in your group gets the virus, you want to make sure that it hits you at least 3 times before you pass it on to somebody else. In this instance, my Necromancer gets the virus, they're going to wait just a little bit, I'm going to communicate that I will not be moving, and once they've taken those few hits, they're going to pass it off to me, and that way we're both going to be fine and able to tank it without anybody being instant killed. It's also worth noting that this is very unnecessary, but if you want to use the Barricade ability, you can use Barricade and you'll only take half damage from it. But just like that, the virus is gone and we are ready to continue in the fight. In this group, what we've decided is that the base is going to deal with the Crocodiles while the DPSers are going to go into their respective portals. You're also going to see a timer on screen that says destruction, and the way that this works is if you do not finish the mechanics in time within this 97 seconds or 100 seconds at 2000% Enrage, everyone in the group will be instant killed. And at 2000 Enrage, it could take a little bit of practice to get the timing down, but the DPS check isn't too bad as long as you're coordinated and you know ahead of time what you're doing. That being said though, the lower the Enrage you go, the more time you have, so you can learn this one at whatever Enrage you'd like and work your way up to 2000%. Entering the portal, we're going to be in a different kind of room, and this looks different on each side, but it is functionally the same. The first thing you're going to see is an NPC on screen that is called the Chain Warden. What you have to do is kill this Chain Warden, and then once this Chain Warden dies, you will then be able to attack the 3 chains. And once you kill those 3 chains, your objective as the DPSer is to kill these 3 chains, and you want to do this as quickly as possible. If you're using Necromancy, you probably don't need to Living Death, but you do definitely want to spam Deathmark. And if you're maging, this is a genuinely good opportunity to use your Fractured Staff of Armadyl special if you have one, and basically try to do as much damage as you can. You can use your Roar of Awakening spec, and on top of that, you can also use Metamorphosis if you really want to, although it's not entirely necessary. All of these floor mechanics are also relatively punishing, and you'll see the telegraphing on the floor. On the different sides, they work kind of differently, and this is by far the more annoying one on the east side, but either way, you're going to see us trying to dodge as much stuff as we possibly can, but we will get hit a few times, and every time you take a hit, you're going to take about 3,000 damage. While everyone else is inside the portals and dealing with their chains, you're going to notice 4 statues on your screen. 2 of them are not doing anything, 1 of them is yellow, and 1 of them is green. The green statues have not been activated, which means the chain has not been broken. But every time a chain is broken on the opposite side, the statue will glow yellow. And when a statue is glowing yellow, it means that the base needs to click on it. You're going to see that right here. I'm going to head over to the statue and I'm going to click it, but it's one click for each chain. So in this instance, I click once and it's still yellow. So I'm going to click a second time, but now this chain is green. So I do not want to click it until it turns yellow as they have killed the third chain. And just like that, chain 3 is down and we can now head over to the other side. I also wanted to mention that the east statue is corresponding to the west chain and the west statue is corresponding to the east chain. So in this instance, I could tell the people on the west side were moving a little bit quicker, so I knew that their statue would be ready to go first. One other thing I've done here is I've actually dropped a movement prism in the middle of the room, and you're gonna see why in just a moment. But once I've clicked on the statue 3 times, it's now gonna stop glowing as aggressively and the VFX on it are gonna chill out a bit. And that basically means my work here is done on this statue. Now that statue 1 is done and I've broken a chain that was imprisoning the Echo of Apmeken 3 times, we're now gonna head on over to the west side of the room where the same thing is gonna happen. But you still wanna be careful and make sure that you're not spam clicking here because you will kill your entire team. If you click on the statue and it's glowing green, everyone in the group is gonna take 2,000 damage, which we don't really want here. It's also worth noting that breaking the chains are on a timer, so if you take too long to click on these statues, the chain could regenerate, in which case they will have to then kill the chain again to free the statue. But in this instance, we've got some perfect timing and all of our chains are down. At this point, you're also going to see some movement mechanics and some tiles opening up on the floor. This is an additional layer of mechanic that you have to deal with, and it is not terribly hard to dodge. So even though there's a ton of stuff going on the screen, in reality, there is a ton of gap, and all you need to do is walk back and forth, as I am here, between 2 of the areas. And right now, I'm just dealing with some of the trash mobs, which you don't really have to do. More or less, I'm hanging out, because you're going to see this other player in the instance here is dragging a buff. Let me show you what that looks like. Once you've cleared all 3 of your chains, you're going to see in just a second here that I'm going to be able to click on Crondis, who is in the arena, and just like that, I'm going to liberate the Echo of Crondis. And at this point, I'm actually going to get this ball that is going to follow me throughout the fight. And at this point, you will not be able to use any movement abilities. You will not be able to surge or anything else. Now, as soon as you liberate the Echo, what you're going to see is these floor mechanics are going to start up in the arena. So what I did right as I left the portal is I used the reflect ability just to be safe. You can also use devotion, but every time you get hit using devotion, you're actually going to lose some time on it. So it will not last terribly long, and it's likely to only tank a hit or 2. You're also going to notice that I do not care whatsoever about dodging anything in this instance because I need to get to the statue before the destruction timer, and right now, it's at 14 seconds. My base has also kindly left me a Prism of Salvation, which means I can click on it to save me a little bit of time and jump me directly to it. One other thing I want to mention here, and you actually get to watch me making a mistake, is with about 26 seconds left in the destruction timer on phase 2, you'll actually get 3 Salawas that spawn and have bars above their heads. These guys are extremely dangerous, and what they're going to do is they're going to lock on to one person, usually the person who is carrying the blessing. And as soon as the bar fills up, they are all going to barge that player for mass melee damage. In this instance, I wasn't paying attention. I was focused on getting to my statue, and because of that, I didn't put on my deflect melee. And because of that, I'm gonna get barged and I'm gonna get signed. Once you've got your movement down, you're very unlikely to see this mechanic, but especially when learning, these guys can do a ton of damage, so it's good to be mindful and look out for them. What we're gonna do is there are 2 more crocodiles that will have come out. We're gonna get rid of the crocodiles, we're gonna ignore everything else, and then at that point, once the crocodiles have been dealt with, all we're gonna do is we're gonna do a DPS rotation underneath Amascut because Amascut is currently staggered and will be for the duration of the bar under her head. So this is a really good opportunity for a ton of free damage, and even if you have a million mobs following you around, there are a lot of really good opportunities to kill them with AoEs, things like Death Skulls, so you don't have a lot to worry about. They also don't do a ton of damage, so you can kind of chill here and just get some free damage on Amascut. Also, I know so far into this, we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been a little bit confusing, but it's worth noting that phases 3 and 4 are basically repeats of phases 1 and 2, so although you might feel like we're not very far into it, we're actually over halfway in terms of phases. With that said, let's head in to phase 3. Phase 3 as a DPSer is very similar to phase 1, as the boss goes through basically the exact same attack rotation, but the one crucial difference is on top of that, there are also floor mechanics, and something important about these floor mechanics is that if they hit you, they will actually clear any of your cast defensive abilities. So you can't really tank them, and you need to be really careful not to be hit by these. As a member of the DPS pile, it matters a little bit less, but especially in a minute when we talk about basing, it is absolutely essential that you do not miss any of these steps. We have the exact same rotation order as phase 1 here though, so we're going to deal with the scarabs as a member of the DPS pile. Another combo you can do as well for dealing with these scarabs is if you don't have a Necromancer using Threads of Fate, you can also just use Greater Chain and then combo that with either Asphyxiate, Impact, or Deep Impact to reduce the shield on the scarabs and then clear them off with whatever you like. It's also worth noting here that a lot of these movement mechanics are actually based on the location of the players. So as everyone moves out for the scarabs, the movement and the wave mechanics are also going to move out as well. Once again, if you do get hit though, it isn't really the end of the world. You're also going to see here that because I came too close to the base, and one other member of my group did too, we're actually going to take some massive range hits, and that's why the base kind of stands by themselves. It is a lot safer for the group. And at this point, all we're going to do is just try to do as much damage as we can to the boss. Next up, my screen has gone red, so I'm going to pray deflect melee, as is everyone else in the group, but we need to be cautious that we're still stepping through the movement mechanics because we do not want to get our defensive abilities cleared, because that's a really easy way to die. That is basically the end of phase 3. All we're doing is exactly the same as before, except we are stepping one tile in and one tile out to deal with the movement mechanics. That is literally it. But now, let's get into basing phase 3, which is a little bit more difficult. As soon as the bar underneath Amascut expires, we're going to be ready for phase 3. I also wanted to apologize for the Discord overlay on my screen. This was a really good phase 3 I had after recording this video initially, so we've re-recorded some sections as I've learned more tips and I've based significantly more kills. Also wanted to mention apologies for my voice in all of these re-recorded clips. I have been live and helping people with their first 2000% Enrage kills for 22 hours in the last day and a half, so my voice is just absolutely wrecked, but I wanted to get this video out as soon as possible, so we're recording anyway. With that said, let's head in to phase 3. As soon as the bar under Amascut's head is completely full from charging up the statues, phase 3 is going to begin. You're going to notice here that because I'm using magic, I can actually stand pretty far out, and that's going to do two things for me. One, it's going to make sure that nobody else in my group has to deal with any splintered auto attacks, and they can just focus on dealing damage and avoiding the mechanics. But on top of that, you're going to see where I'm standing is really nice when these first sets of wave mechanics begin to spawn. These waves are really important to avoid because they will reset your defensive abilities. So as an example, when you get the bend the knee mechanic, which does come up in phase 3, the same way you get it in phase 1, and you're meant to use immortality, if you get hit by any of these waves, that's going to reset your immortality and then you are going to die. So be really, really mindful to not get hit by any of these waves at any point. And that's basically the most important thing you can do as the base. It's going to go very similarly to phase 1, where you're actually going to start with the exact same sets of mechanics. I'm going to start off with a triple tap, and you're also going to notice here that because of where I'm standing, I actually don't need to dodge anything just yet, but that is about to change, as there are going to be points where the waves are going to expand outward, and I will have to take a singular step in. Generally speaking, when I step in, all I'm going to do with my cursor is I'm just going to put it one tile behind me, because if I'm standing in, the next thing I'm going to have to do is stand out, and vice versa. And I'm going to spend the entire phase literally on these exact same two tiles that I've marked on screen. I will not be moving outside of that whatsoever. Phase 3 is very similar to phase 1 with the addition of these movement mechanics. So all we're going to do here is focus on our mechanics as best as we can. The next thing we're going to get here is the tear them apart, which means scarabs are spawning, and I'm going to preemptively cast immortality here because I know I'm going to need it for the bend the knee, which is the next mechanic. And at this point, all we're doing is we're focusing on staying alive. I've got my spirit shield on, and we don't have a whole lot to worry about. One other thing I'm doing here is I am making sure to drop a prism so that my hellhound doesn't die on me, because that's a lot easier to do than spamming scrolls. We've got the bend the knee, I'm going to step backwards, and it's going to hit me. Now, I'm going to pause here because this is the exact moment that a lot of people who are learning to base completely and utterly die. And the reason for that is right after your immortality pops here, Amascut is going to do a double melee attack into a melee attack and a magic attack. And it happens at this exact point every single kill. So let's talk about exactly what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have resonance available, and the very first thing I'm going to do out of my immortality is I am going to spam that resonance keybind so that I've got a res. That's going to take one of the two hits and make it a heal instead of a hurt. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have one of or both of debilitate and reflect available, and that's going to make a huge difference too, just to completely nullify the amount of damage I'm going to take. Because if you do nothing to block these attacks and you miss a prayer flick, you are literally taking over 10,000 damage. With that said, I'm going to hit play and I'll show you guys exactly what happens. So now I've used resonance, I've used reflect, I've stepped in, and just like that, with the attack switch, instead of getting KO'd, I am taking about 2,000 damage. After that, I'm also going to elect to use Debilitate, although it probably wasn't necessary in that instance. And all we're going to do from here on out is we're going to step back. I'm going to Pray Deflect Melee because my screen has gone red, and we're just focused on these 2 exact tiles. You can also use Barricade like I did here if you want to have basically a no food phase. This is not remotely necessary, but it can be nice, especially if you want to double up on Reflect and Debilitate. But if your group is struggling for damage, what you would do instead of doing that is you would use 1 of Reflect or Debilitate before, and 1 of Reflect or Debilitate after your screen change attack. And in doing so, you'll have an opportunity to get out a little bit more damage. But once again, dealing damage is really secondary to surviving and being the base. After our screen change, we've got another triple tap. And I do want to mention, this part can really take a lot of practice, and it can be quite spooky to deal with, because not only do you have to dodge the waves, but you also have to prayer flick at the same time. Something I've noticed here that is really helpful is if you have your prayers keybound on your keyboard instead of your mouse, you're going to have a way better time with this one. Because if you're trying to move your mouse while also trying to hit different prayer keybinds, it could be a little bit of a tough one. But with that said, you're going to see I'm going to step back, I'm paying attention, I've got my range pray, I've got my mage pray, I've got my melee pray, and then I step forward. It really is very similar to phase 1, it's just got an extra layer of intrigue and an extra layer of difficulty to it. After that mechanic, you're going to see that I'm going to run it Debilitate and Reflect yet again, and I'm basically taking virtually no damage for the rest of the phase. For phase 4, I'm going back to being a DPSer, and you're going to notice that just like phase 2, portals have opened up and Gatekeeper Gorillas have too. But this time around, the Gatekeeper Gorillas have a shield on them, and the only way to break the shield is to kill one of these exploding scarabs, and then you actually need to pick up the scarab, just like I did there, and then yeet it onto the Gatekeeper Gorilla to break the shield. And once the shield is broken, you can then begin to kill it. On phase 4, you're going to notice that there's a little bit less time than on phase 2, just because you have to take that extra time to wait for the scarabs to spawn and to throw them onto the gorilla. So you need to be really on point with your timing, or you could end up in a bit of a bad spot. Now that the Gatekeeper Gorilla is dead, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to throw 4 scarabs into the portals on each side. And these can be done by anyone in the group. In general, as a base, the base is going to help out on whichever side needs it, and on one of the other sides, I've let the Necromancer head on in, and I'm actually going to throw the Scarabs in. And the reason we need 4 is just like on phase 1, there's a Chain Warden as well as 3 chains. But this time around, they all have the same buff, so you actually need to throw a Scarab on them. So you're going to see here, I'm just going to be grabbing these Scarabs, and I'm going to be chucking them into the portal. And you might also see throughout this, that was one that my base actually threw from across the map, as there's a 70 tile range on these things, just to make sure that we get enough. So just like that, that is 4 Scarabs in. I'm going to get a 5th one in for good measure, because if any of the Scarabs blow up inside of the realm, that's one that we can't use to break the chain. But now I'm going to head on in and we're going to get going. I'm ignoring that Scarab on the floor because I can look at the chains and visually none of them have that green glow around them, which means I know that my Necromancer has already thrown all of the Scarabs on all of the 3 chains. And at this point, you're going to see that the movement mechanics are ever so slightly different. And while they look absolutely insane, it's actually really easy, and you only actually have to move 1 tile every time you get them. Once again, it looks absolutely terrifying and it's very easy to panic on, but when you really look at what mechanic is being asked of you, it's take 1 singular step. And just like that, we've got all of our chains down, and we're gonna grab the buff as soon as our base has finished clicking on our statue. Because in this kill, I'm not the runner, I'm just gonna head on out, and I'm just gonna make sure that nobody else in the group needs support. But unlike on phase 2, where you've got a bunch of different crocodiles spawning that you wanna deal with, nothing really comes out here. So all you really wanna do is get ready to deal some damage to Amascut and get set up close to Amaskut's feet for a sunshine. You're also going to notice that some of these Scarabs are beginning to blow up, and that is entirely okay, and there are a couple options here. Option 1 is you can just use Soul Split and just tank the Scarabs, because there shouldn't be too many of them blowing up unless someone in your group has decided to troll and run around using area of effect attacks. So in my opinion, everyone should just Soul Split. But the other thing you can do is you can actually throw the Scarabs off of the map all the way to the south, and if you do that, they will not hit you. But once again, just like in phase 2, Amascut is staggered, and all we're doing here is we're just doing some good old-fashioned damage before we're gonna head in to phase 5. Now let's head into the base point of view for phase 4, where I'm just gonna mention that a lot of this boss fight really does come down to communication. You need to know ahead of time who's gonna be throwing which Scarabs in, who's gonna be taking which side, and as soon as you've done that, you should be in a really good spot. You're also gonna see here that as the base, instead of standing in the middle of the room, I chose to stand on the west, because I thought that the people that were in the portal on the east were gonna get done first. But something went wrong here, and instead, a statue on the west is glowing first. Even though I'm already on the east side, it's better to click on the glowing statues as soon as you can, because we don't want those chains to regenerate. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna click on it once, I'm going to click on it twice. They're not at their third one yet, so now I'm going to head on over to the other one, and occasionally you kind of have to do this and get a little bit scrappy. Just like that, we're now going to head all the way back to our original location, and we were able to do it without any of the statues regenerating. You're also going to see here, there's a lot less time on our destruction timer, and at 2k in particular, you need to be pretty on point. You don't need to do a crazy amount of damage once you're inside, but you definitely need to be coordinated with knowing who is going what, where. And then after that, as soon as everything has been deposited, it's exactly the same as what the DPSers are doing. I'm standing under the boss, and I'm waiting until the buffs have been deposited so that I can start dealing some damage. And once again, even though you've got a ton of monsters that are currently on me and meleeing me, they don't hit very much. So we're just going to wait for the Necromancer's Death Skulls to deal with pretty much everything. And just like that, we are heading into Phase 5. Phase 5 is one of the most interesting phases of the boss fight because you really get to catch your breath on P5. It doesn't really matter how fast you go, you can take this phase very slow and low, and during the phase, Amascut doesn't even attack, so you could really relax here just a little bit, as long as you're paying attention to the mechanics of the fight that you need to progress. The first thing that's going to happen at the start of Phase 5, though, is all of the remaining scarabs are going to flip over. And I'm just telling you right now, if you added up 2,000 damage times all of these scarabs, it is an amount of damage that you do not want to take. So what everyone in our group is going to elect to do is we are all going to elect to use Barricade at the same time once these scarabs are at just about half HP. You're going to see I'm going to throw down my Magma Tempest, and now I have used Barricade along with everybody else in my group. At lower Enrages than 2000%, where Intercept works, one person could barricade and intercept everybody in the group, but as this is a time phase, which means the damage you deal doesn't terribly matter, you're kind of fine to do it this way, and everyone tends to just barricade. Now, let's talk about what to actually do for Phase 5. As the base point of view, it's pretty easy. All I'm going to do as the base is I'm going to be effectively the Wrangler. So I'm just going to be standing here, and I'm going to be tagging all of the monsters that come up this staircase. Currently, there's a bug where if you tag them early, they will not aggro onto you, and they're instead just going to walk right by you. So you want to do is make sure that you're tagging things once they're off of the staircase. Along with these feline guards, you're also going to see these smaller ones that are called light stealers, and they're very important to deal with because they're going to lose the progression of the phase. And eventually, if you let too many of them get through and get all the way to the northern part of the arena, you can actually lose your entire kill. So my main priority is tagging everything with things like Magma Tempest, but whenever I see a light stealer, my goal is to root it in place as best as possible. And the best way to do that, in my experience, is to use Entangle. So I'm spellbook swapping with Borrowed Power, and I'm using Entangle with every single one. It's a pretty simple roll, but basically don't let anything get by you, and Magma Tempest, as well as your other bleeds and area of effects with magic, are really good for this. But while I'm being a Wrangler, what is everybody else doing? Let's go take a look at the Necromancer point of view for Phase 5. They should give you a better indication of everything else going on. So in this instance, the base, who is under my cursor, is wrangling. So that's what I was doing before. But this time around, I'm actually going to be one of the chargers. You're going to notice here that all of the statues are currently glowing because we just threw out the first 4 phases, went and reformed all 4 of them, which means we are about to be empowering Ampeken, the god of light. And in order to do that, you need to build a circuit with your team that connects the power from the statue all the way to this thing that I have marked on the screen here. You have to do this a total of 4 times, and the 2 on the edges can be charged solo. So one individual player just needs to stand in between the statue and the object, and it'll charge all by itself. But for the 2 closest ones, you actually need this to pass through 2 separate players. So you'll have one player standing a little bit further back, and then one player standing kind of right in front of it. And as you can see, it's going to be shooting right through just like this and charging it up. And you can actually see the reform progress on screen. But there are a couple other things going on at the same time that need to be dealt with. The first thing you want to think about is these soul obelisks. These have 60,000 life points at 2000% enrage, and they do absolutely nothing until they reach full HP, and they are constantly healing. As soon as they reach full HP, everyone in the group is going to start getting barraged with 2,000 damage magic attacks that are pretty annoying. So it's just an important thing to not forget that you want to make sure that you're occasionally going over to these obelisks and just tapping them with a bleed or a wand spec or an omni power or a bloat, just to make sure that they don't hit full HP. If they do hit full HP though, it's not the end of the world, and it's definitely not a lost condition, unlike this green line on the floor. If we zoom in on this, you're going to see 4 different cracks on the floor. One of them is currently green. And these green lines correspond to which statues and which reformations on Ampeken are currently being charged up. And this is the scary buff that is both extremely easy to deal with and also extremely punishing to fail. Here's how it works. Anytime this line goes green, someone needs to stand on it. And in general, people choose to do this right at Amaskut's feet, because if you're standing right at Amaskut's feet, if multiple lines go green at the same time, you're just gonna block all of them. So very, very convenient that way. But here's the deal. As soon as you block that green line, as is about to be done right there, you're gonna see that this player has this smoke following their character. And what this smoke means is if you tank a green line again, you are going to get insta-killed, and it kills you through a sign of life, through everything. So because of that, we can't just stand here and AFK and charge it up. What I'm actually going to have to do is I'm now going to swap places with this player, just like that. And now next time it goes green in just a second, I am going to grab this one while they are making the connection. Now, green line is done. I now have the debuff, so now I'm going to swap back with them and make the connection over and over again. There's another important thing to mention in this boss fight. This is not a very difficult operation. We're literally just swapping back and forth, but if you lose focus or you stop paying attention or you stop calling it out, it can actually end up being extremely bad because you end up getting insta-killed, and you do not want to get out of the fight and insta-killed on phase 5. Something else I wanted to mention is that you can charge these up multiple at a time, but generally speaking, for the higher enrages, especially 2000%, in order to give yourself more of a damage window, it's actually slower but easier to charge them up one at a time. I would also never ever recommend charging it up 4 at a time, because if you charge all 4 simultaneously, that also impacts the amount of monsters that the base is going to have to wrangle, and they will get completely and utterly overwhelmed. So really, the decision you need to make is, are you going to go 1 at a time, or are you going to go 2 at a time? And if you go 2 at a time, it's not very difficult of an operation, because all you would do is you would send this player under my cursor, and they would just be solo charging up the one all the way on the west side. And then that way, you'd get the whole western side of the room done at once. That being said, for a 2k kill, we're going to do them 1 at a time. As soon as the reformation is complete, all you're going to do is one player in the team is going to click on Ampeken in the middle of the screen on my cursor. And as soon as Ampeken is clicked on, a couple different things are going to happen. The first thing that should happen is your Necromancer should use Threads of Fate and clear off as many of these monsters as possible. If you don't clear them fast enough, everyone in the team is going to get insta-killed. So it's a really good Necromancy moment. But outside of that, as soon as Ampeken is clicked on, you're going to see Amascut start to run around the room. And one player is going to be chosen to shield us from her shadow. This is a really simple mechanic, but you also need to pay attention and make sure you're doing it right. For this mechanic, all you have to do is whichever player is called needs to stand closest to Amascut. So what's going to happen is Amascut is going to do a shadow attack, and in this instance, I was called first. I'm going to get to the front, and this attack is then going to pass through me and then through everybody else in my group. And in doing so, it's going to protect them from a massive hit that at some enrages is also an instant kill. So basically, if your screen goes yellow and you're summoned, you need to go up to Amascut as quickly as possible. My recommendation here would be to just never use the dive ability unless you're picked. And outside of that, this is a really solid DPS window. So although I'm not on a living death in this example, because we're pretty good on damage, you definitely want to be doing a DPS rotation as much as possible. And coming out of this, every single time you get this cycle, you should be able to do between 1 and 1.5 million damage as a team. And as you can see here, the reform progress counter on screen is going up. I chose it again, and now it is at 25%, which means that is the last jump Amascut is going to do. Once again, if you get called and you don't end up directly at Amaskut's feet in front of everyone else, anyone that gets hit by that is going to get instant killed. Some good news though. Although this was a lot of information to take in, you actually just repeat this 4 times in a row to slow phase and slowly progress through it. So you don't really need to worry about learning any new information, and you're going to get a lot of practice on phase 5 because it is very repetitive, and honestly, it is just a little slow as well. With that said though, it's kind of a cool phase, and the audio-visual design as well is absolutely sick. But as you can see, exactly the same thing here. I'm swapping with the same player I was before, and all we're going to do is we're going to get the second charge up done. After that second charge up, it's going to be exactly the same as before. The reform is going to get to 50%. We're going to repeat that again, get it to 75, and then we are going to repeat it again all the way to 100%. I also did want to mention that there is a damage cap. So while there are no phase HP caps in this fight, so you can't get it to a certain threshold of HP and then it instantly phases, there is a maximum amount of damage you can do. And at 2000% Enrage, on phase 5, the maximum damage you can do is to get the boss to 1.8 million before phase 6. But once again, you have to do the full reform to get to phase 6, so the damage may or may not matter very much depending on how good your team is at getting that damage in. Something else I'm going to mention here is that if you and your group are struggling to hit these damage thresholds, I cannot stress enough how sick it is to bring melee and the exit kill here, because you're going to get 4 opportunities to berserk and just do a crazy amount of damage. And to make matters even better, if you're meleeing on this phase, you can actually do it from anywhere in the map. So once you barge the boss for your greater barge, it is actually going to move you, but then after that, you can actually just stand in the middle of the room and you can melee from across the map. So kind of convenient if you're the kind of player that wants a little bit more damage. Melee switch goes really, really hard here. But with that said, we have made it to the end of phase 5, and it's time to head in to phase 6. What you're going to notice at the start of phase 6 is a massive orb is going to spawn in the middle of the room that has an HP bar and can be killed. And on top of that, you're also going to notice that Amaskut's HP is now black. And at the end of this phase, if you don't play your cards correctly, that is how much damage you're going to take as a team. But you'll see as we get through it here that it's actually very easy to avoid all the damage. First thing that's going to happen is everyone in the group is going to do an okay amount of damage to this ball. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the damage output on the black bar under control. That being said though, you don't want to use an ultimate ability or anything like that because you want to save that for later. And in just a second here, a player is going to be summoned to follow the boss's light. And at this point, that is where things get a little bit more interesting. Whichever player is chosen to follow the light is actually going to have to go through a portal that is about to spawn either on the east or the west side of the room. In this case, it was on the east side. And then at that point, it's kind of like a game of Pictionary that they have to play by jumping up on top of these platforms while coordinating with someone that is on the ground floor. It's worth noting that at 2000 Enrage, you do not get to choose who's selected, so it is completely luck of the draw. But at the lower Enrages, you can actually choose who you want to send up, so you can predetermine what you want to do for this mechanic. While everyone else is just attacking the orb, this is what the other members of the group are going to do. I'm going to show you both points of view. The first thing I'm going to mention here before we begin is what you're trying to do is you're trying to match symbols. So you're going to see at the left-hand corner of the screen that there is currently a glowing stick, and that is currently where the player that was sent up is standing. So what we need to do to avoid collapse, which is also marked on screen, is I need to then on the ground stand on the exact same icon. But while I do that, I do also need to avoid all of these bombs on the floor, because if you take one of these unblocked, it's going to hit 15,000 damage. But that being said, you can use defensives to reduce this. So things like Reflect are great, Disruption Shield great, Resonance great. And it's also worth noting that this grid that I've shown on screen here with all of the icons is a 3x3. So as an example, I could stand on any of the tiles that I've currently marked, and that would count as me standing on the stick. And you can tell for sure, because when I go to stand on the stick, you're gonna see that it lights up whenever I'm on an eligible tile, and the collapse timer is gonna pause. Something else you're gonna notice here is that I'm currently able to see which tile this player is on. This is a really good kind of hack if you are on a team where some people don't want to join a voice call or not necessarily be on Discord. What you can do is actually, if anyone in the group has a 2K display or more, which by the way, this is really silly, but it's kind of pay to win, I guess, they can put their camera mode on Freedom Classic and just scroll all the way out. And they might be good enough to be able to see all of the icons and do them. Although I will say, when you're this zoomed out, it is pretty difficult to actually be able to pay attention and dodge all of the bombs on the floor. So that is what I did in this instance, but of course you definitely don't have to do that. Just another example of this one. In this example, Mod Reaper was sent up, and I'm going to be playing with him, and this time around you're also going to get game sounds so you can hear what the communication is between the two of us. I'm also zoomed out enough here that I can see, but of course this is not necessary as long as you're communicating. So we're kind of doing a double POV here. So not only am I completely zoomed out in Freedom Classic camera mode so that I can see the symbols, but if you're on a voice call, even better to just be able to call it out too. As you can see as well, what's happening up top on this platform is that Mod Reaper is currently having to kill one of these mobs on each platform in order to jump from platform to platform and grab Ampekken's light. So you're going to see as soon as this mob dies, he will end up showing up on the next platform.
Diamond.
Okay, on diamond.
Bomb in a bit.
What's next?
Line.
Okay, line.
Glove. I'm just gonna grab it.
Get there.
Nice.
Get behind the boss. So that's what that sounds like for the player who's down below. Pretty simple, just make sure you're communicating. And the one thing that I didn't mention about phase 6 is whenever you see these green orbs that are the engulfing shadow tears on the ground, you also want to click on them and also pray deflect magic. You can just do that for the entirety of this phase. So yeah, that's sort of how this part works from down below, but I'm also going to show you what it looks like when you're the person going up top. In this example, I was selected to go up top, so this time you're going to see a piece of light on your screen either on the east side or the west side, and then all you need to do is click on it. And at this point, I'm going to head on up. I've got bird, so I'm going to communicate bird, and then all you need to do is you need to kill these mages. It is really useful to kill these mages as quickly as you possibly can. You probably don't want to use an ultimate ability or anything, but it is beneficial for the person down below because they're trying to dodge bombs and everything else, so you will likely run out of time if you take too long here. But it's not like a crazy DPS check, it's just like use abilities that are good. Omni Power, Wild Magic, Wand Spec. If you're using Necromancy, you know, use your special attacks, use your Omni Guard, whatever it may be, and you should be in an okay spot. With that said though, I've got bird, I've got the double knife or the double flag or cutlery, depending on what you want to call it, heading on over to the third one. I'm going to get the third one done in just a second here. I've got the cane or the bendy stick or the inverted J, whatever you want to call it, heading on over to the next one. We've got the diamond, and then for the last one, you can actually skip calling it if you don't want to and just immediately reach for Apmeken's light. So you actually don't need to call boot here. You can just click on the light, and just like that, you've got the light and you're ready to rock. For this section of phase 6, whichever player went up top and grabbed the light needs to go in front of Amascut, and your main objective is, while you can set up a DPS rotation, really, you just want to make sure that you're not dying. While the player who grabbed the light is going to be in front of Amascut and making sure not to die, everyone else is going to form what is called a death dot. And that's everyone standing on the exact same pre-established tile. You can do this anywhere to the south of the arena, but my recommendation would be to do it on this line exactly as I've marked on screen. The reason for this is if you're all the way at the back of the arena, the clones that are about to spawn sometimes do some kind of wonky movement things and make it so that area of effect abilities like Greater Chain just don't work. From that point, everyone in this death dot is going to pray deflect magic and also use the reflect ability. And then as soon as the clones spawn in and barge into us, what we're going to do next is we're then going to swap to deflect melee. And at this point, this is really where the necromancers get to shine. And this is why it is so important to have at least one necromancer in your group. At this point, the people who are using magic are going to use things like Tsunami, and you can also do the Fractured Staff of Armadyl special if you have one. And on top of that, you can also use Greater Chain as well as the Roar of Awakening special attack to get a good bit of extra damage. And bonus points if you have the Corroming 1 perk, so that hits all 4 clones instead of hitting 3 of them. But really, this part is all about the necromancers. And what they're going to do at this point is they're going to use Invoke Death, they're going to use Threads of Fate, and then it's going to be a Volley of Souls, a Death Guard special attack with stacks, and then a bloat. And in doing that, you are more or less going to completely nuke all of these clones all at the same time. And just like that, 1's dead, 2's dead, 3's dead, and 4 is dead. And after that, everyone in the group is going to go right up to Amascut, go into a damage boosting ultimate ability, and deal as much damage as humanly possible to the boss. And it really is as easy as that. If you go into this section without necromancers though, it is a lot harder, and there are some negative things that can happen, which I'm going to talk about next. One thing I did also want to mention for phase 6 though is because we were a lot slower to kill our clones, you're going to see a number of people in the group have these green bars above their heads that are ticking up. The way that this green bar works is it is a bomb that is basically a one-hit. And the only way to reduce it to 0 is you need to be within range of the Apmeken's light buff that I'm showing on screen. So if you get a bar above your head, what you need to do is, if you have a clone that is dead, you can just do nothing, and all you have to do is go into the light bearer. So all you're gonna do is get over there and get within the light, and you will take no damage, as I do right there. But if your clone is alive, it's important to note that the clones will barge you and do a ton of AoE damage if you try to run them around the room while they're alive. So if you do have a clone, what you need to do before you go to the light bearer is you need to stun your clone. So what you do is you'd use something like the Death Guard special, Soul Strike, Impact, Deep Impact, or Asphyxiate, and then once it's stunned in place, all you're gonna do is then go over to the light bearer, the bar above your head will expire, and then you'll go back behind Amascut, run all the way back down there, and deal with your clone and finish it off. So you can take this phase slow and low, but you do need to be really mindful to not run around too much once your clones have spawned, unless they are stunned. And with that said, once again, we are heading on in to the 7th phase, this time around at 600,000 HP to deal. Phase 7 is both a very difficult and painful phase, but it's also not terribly complicated. You're going to end up in the throne room. You're going to see Apmeken, who I've marked on screen, as well as Amascut, who is permanently affixed in the middle. And then you're going to see 4 statues, one for each of the gods. So you've got Het, Scabaras, Apmeken, and Crondis. what you should do is have one member of your group stand on the quadrant of each of the statues, and then one additional member can kind of do whatever they want. And at that point, all we're going to do is we're going to pray deflect magic, and we're just going to wait until Amascut calls the name of a statue and faces towards Ampeken. When Amascut calls the name of a statue, the player that is in the quadrant corresponding to that statue is going to use the provoke ability to turn Amascut away from Ampeken and face the statue instead. And then at that point, what you're going to see here is that because Amascut turned around, you're going to see the attack, instead of going in and killing Ampeken and dealing damage to Ampeken, which is an insta-kill if Ampeken loses all of his HP, instead, this time around, it's going to go through a player, it's going to go into the statue, and then back out through Amascut. And then at that point, as soon as it's gone back through Amascut, you will be able to deal full damage to the boss, where beforehand, Amascut has 90% damage reduction. And at that point, all you want to do is you want to deal as much damage as you can to finish off Amascut and clear out the fight. One other thing I wanted to mention is that when your statue is selected and you use the provoke ability, you also want to use something like Resonance or Disruption Shield, as it is a fairly substantial hit that you are going to take on your statue once you use provoke. So you will take a ton of damage if you don't disrupt it. In that case, I use Disrupt and Reflect. You're also going to see some similar mechanics to other points of the boss fight at this stage. So as an example, all strength withers, my screen goes red, and at this point, it's going to be time to throw on that deflect melee prayer. But in addition, you're also going to see some movement mechanics on the floor, just like you would see at a boss like Hardmode Necatra, and they work exactly the same way. So you need to be very quick and make sure that you're able to dive out of the way if need be. And just like that, we have cruised our way to a nice, easy Amascut kill. There's one other thing about Phase 7 that I didn't mention when I was giving you the previous rundown, which is depending on which statue is chosen, you're actually going to get a unique mechanic each time, and they all mean completely different things. When Het is chosen, Amascut is able to use Soul Split, so any damage you take is going to heal her, which is by far the best statue to get because it's barely noticeable at all. With the Apmeken statue, what's going to happen is a player is going to get the virus, and depending on what Enrage you're at, you will need to pass it to someone else after taking a few of the hits, or it will be an insta-kill on the player that is selected, but it's just a little bit of extra damage to deal with. Apmeken is definitely one of the better statues to get because you can still deal full damage to the boss, and you can kind of clear the boss likely before anything bad happens. But you will see on screen here right under my cursor that a player is currently tanking the virus. Once again here, we've got a screen change that is turning blue, so we're going to make sure to deal with that. Pray deflect from magic. We've passed on the virus as well, and we are going to cruise to a successful boss kill. But what about the other two? Well, the other two are pretty brutal. Because Crondis was selected in this instance, you're going to see two of the crocodiles spawning in on Phase 7 on the platform. And in general, this is completely fine, and you could just continue to attack and deal damage like normal to kill Amascut. Although, if you don't have a lot of damage stored up and you're planning on being in the fight for a while, it's probably worth killing the crocodiles, because especially if you're a necromancer, if you accidentally throw a death skulls, you are going to be in a world of pain, because your death skulls is going to fly around and it is going to do a ton of self damage to you. In this instance, one of our players completely dies to the crocodile, but as a group, we decide to just continue on attacking the boss. If the crocodile was on you though, you definitely want to make sure that you are praying deflect from missiles, because they do hit like an absolute bus. Something else that can happen on Phase 7 is you can get wave mechanics that are sort of like Necatra as well, but unlike the ones at Necatra, in these ones, one area of the screen is just going to be clear and safe from damage, where everything else is going to blow up at the same time. I will say, I don't really like this mechanic because it's ridiculously hard to see. I will mark on screen which area is safe here, but with everything moving, it's pretty hard to tell. You'll see different players going to different areas and getting hit by it because it's really difficult to visually discern, especially when the rest of your screen is already changing colors for a different mechanic that you need to pray. But with that said, that is effectively the end of the boss fight, and you should be good to go just like that. Okay, and last but not least, let's take a look at what happens when Scabaras is selected. When Scabaras is selected, a number of scarabs are going to spawn on the ground, and they're the same explosive ones as before, as Amascut also gains immunity. And depending on your Enrage, a different amount of these scarabs need to actually be thrown on the boss. But the thing that makes this really sketchy is the movement mechanics that happen basically at the exact same time. In this instance, I believe it takes either 4 or 5 scarabs in order to be able to start damaging the boss. So you kind of lose a good chunk of your entire cycle. And then on top of that, at the end of that, the remaining scarabs are going to blow up. So it's just an absolutely cruel, absolutely brutal setup. And if you get Scabaras, it's just a rough spot to be. But with that said, as long as you can tank and you can keep your life points nice and high, you can get set up for the next set. And unfortunately for us, at this point, we only had 2 members of our group alive. And on top of that, we've got some crocodiles and they are doing some work. So in this instance, we're kind of in a pretty bad spot here, but I did want to show you this clip so that you can get a look at what the actual phase looks like in its entirety, because even though it is good to be able to nuke the entire phase, especially if you bring like an exit kill or whatnot, I think it's also really valuable to see what happens if you don't have quite as much damage and you want to take it slow and low. We've got some movement mechanics. We're working our way through our crocodiles. I'm getting hit by a floor mechanic there. I'm going to get hit by a bunch of magic hits there. We're still dodging as many floor mechanics as we can, and that is a second cycle survived as we head in to cycle 3. Okay, I think that is just about everything you need to know for 500, 750, 1000%, and eventually 2000% Enrage Amascut. Hopefully you have a pretty good idea of what the roles are, what the different players have to do in the boss fight, as well as what the base's responsibilities are throughout the fight. Overall, I'm loving this boss. It's so refreshing to see a boss fight where you don't need to worry quite as much about just pumping as much damage as you possibly can, and instead, it's pretty cool to be able to just work together with your teammates. You get through this fight by collaborating with your group and having good communication, and that's really all there is to it. So it's been a really fun boss fight to bring other players to that I maybe wouldn't otherwise have a chance to PVM with without maybe them feeling like they were slowing everybody down, or potentially without me feeling like it just wasn't a really good opportunity. But at this boss fight, you can kind of bring anyone, and as long as you can work with them and talk through it with them, you can get some really good, clean, awesome kills at Amascut. So with that said, I hope this video is helpful. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. And I've been recording this for a number of hours, so I do apologize for my voice. And outside of that, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it. Subscribe for more, and I'll catch you very soon on the flip side for the next one.